Hi, everybody. I'm Barry Kostrensky. These are artist talks that I do every Tuesday night. We have sort of a very steady state of followers, which is very nice. As well, we have our model, Mo Kelly here. She's on 3 screens for you to draw. And I think you know by now, I'm sort of trying to get us to activate one skill, the drawing, and the listening skill, and see how they feed. It's an option, if you like to draw. Mo is there. We have a special presenter tonight, as we just about always do. Tonight we have Yvonne Shortt, and I won't do much of an intro. I will just say these talks do end up on my YouTube channel. You can get to them through my website. And as far as our model, Mo, if anybody would like to contribute, she volunteers her time. She's a blast. We had her speak at one of our talks. You can reach out to me and I'll send her information along. As well, if you do any drawings that you'd like to share with Mo, you can send it to me and I'll forward it, or I'll send you her information. So Yvonne, first I want to thank you. Thank you for sort of giving your time. I always say, time is our most valuable commodity. And then I sort of hyphenated that by saying, so is your mental capacity. And for all of you coming and sort of letting Yvonne into our minds. And I think what we found through all these talks, as someone said earlier, they're inspiring. They make us grow. We learn, we think, and we're also getting new information. Yvonne, we're all artists. We share so many similarities, but you can mix up 10 things in 10 factorial different ways, touching on Yvonne's math background there. And in other words, there are a lot of permutations and combinations, and we all get different things, just like we all draw the model differently. And Yvonne has a unique story to bring, as we all do. And I look forward to it. Just thank you for coming and giving your time, Yvonne. Thank you. And that's the handle.
Hi, everyone. I'm Yvonne. Nice to meet you all. So I like to do my talks just normally I just like people to ask questions to not just for me to be kind of talking, but for it to be more of a conversation and a collaboration. So just to kind of let you know that would be really nice to have a conversation around the work and around the ideas that are presented. First of all, I'm a multidisciplinary artist, and I use something, I use a question-based approach. What does that basically mean? It means that I like to ask questions, and from the question, the material is chosen. So once I have an idea about a question that I'm interested in asking, then I will say, okay, am I going to use clay? Am I going to use a paint? Am I going to use water? What is it that is going to help me to explore this question? And then everything kind of goes from there. Many of my projects kind of last for years. I'm going to introduce you to a project that I'm working on now. It's very important to me. It's one aspect of the work, and it's one question. Normally I'm working on maybe 10 or 15 questions at a time. So I'll just share should I share the screen?
Yep, thank you. And Yvonne, thanks for pointing that out. I usually do mention that we do encourage just what you said. We encourage this to be a dialogue and to have people ask questions along the way. And as well, anyone can use the chat as they like as well.
So many of the projects that I do are outdoors. I do a lot of sculptural work. I use many different kinds of materials, from welding to clay to cement to cinder blocks. And recently, probably around a year and a half ago, I joined a gallery space called AIR Gallery, and I started kind of asking myself questions about kind of what does it mean to be a member of a gallery space? What does it mean to exist within the gallery context? Because often my work is huge and it's outdoors. So this was kind of a first time for me coming into the gallery space in that way. I had also been approached by commercial galleries, but I really wanted to have my own autonomy. So I decided to join a nonprofit gallery called AIR that had been around for 50 years. And it was really just a great kind of group of people, and really focused on creating on their work. And when I became a member, I started learning more about what does it mean to be an artist within the context of somebody who's looking at galleries and museums. And I learned that many people felt a sense of frustration about what this meant, what it meant to be in a gallery. So I decided to ask a question, because I started to ask a question, and the question I asked was, in any hostile situation, how does the body adapt? So that became a question for me, because for many people who were trying to get into galleries, trying to get into museums, they felt that it was it was a lot of hard work, and often people weren't able to get into these spaces. So that became a guiding question for me. In any hostile situation, how is the body going to adapt? So I'm going to kind of take you along on this journey and how I asked this question, and then how I use art in regards to answering it. So one of the things that I've noticed with in the context of galleries, commercial spaces, nonprofit spaces, we have this sense of hierarchy. There are people who are in charge, and there are people who want something, and those people who sit at the top are often the people who are making a determination. So if you want to be a member of a gallery, you might do a whole bunch of things to try and get in, and there's like a hierarchy, there's a pecking order. And for some of us, that can feel, for many of us, I think it can be very hard. There's a perception that the resources that we need to exist are limited. So I decided to kind of interrogate that. What does hierarchy mean in the context of the art world? And some of the things that I noticed was that hierarchy kind of exists in a couple of ways. There's a perception that resources are scarce. So I decided to create a sculpture around scarcity of resources. And so this was a piece that was made out of clay. It was harvested from local creeks. And once I harvested the clay, I made this piece, and then I kind of made a couple of other pieces, which was ego and hierarchy. So these are kind of like the different pieces that were made. And then when I made these pieces, I also kind of collaborated with with a textile artist in San Francisco. And what we did was we created some clothing that kind of went around them. And then I went out into the landscape and I wore these pieces, hierarchy, I wore ego, and I wore scarcity. And I just kind of went out and contemplated, what do these things mean within the context of my own life? And so for me, what ended up happening was that I started to see that often, not just within the art world, but even within our own, within jobs, within different realms, that there was a perception of resources being scarce. And when there's a perception of resources being scarce, there is this kind of feeling of scarcity.
Yvonne, let me ask you, I like your approach, and I like what you're getting at, but I'm going to ask you a purely sort of formal question, because when I see these forms, it makes me think, of Aboriginal art, and it also makes me think of African Minkisi power figures. Do you have I assume you've studied art history. Do you have a certain affinity with tribal works and works by original cultures?
I've studied art history, but I kind of draw on my own heritage. So I am part Latin American and I'm also part African. I come from the Congo. So I'm really looking at my own kind of history and but I wouldn't say that my pieces, although it's headwear, there's many different cultures, Native Americans, that use a kind of headwear. And so I think it was important for me to see the different kinds of headwears that many different cultures use, from the Congo as well, and various other spaces, but to make my own pieces. So although those pieces were kind of inspiring to me and looking at my own heritage was inspiring for me, I wanted to make my own kind of work that was devoid of others. So this was my way of kind of creating in my own space. So that's why but I did draw on locally harvesting my own clay from the creeks, which I thought was really important. So I harvested my own clay and I harvested some of them are paints, some of them are paints that I created from my own pigments.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I do often point out, when I see that, I don't necessarily mean to imply you see the art history and then you mimic it, but instead you come at it yourself and you hit sort of a parallel path. But right off, I gotta say, beautiful work, and also a very unique thumbprint in a good way.
Oh, yeah, and I think so. For me, with this project, it's really kind of about me as an artist. And we create for many different reasons. And I think in my projects are all very different. But this particular work was a very personal set of work. So it was really important for me to kind of think about within just thinking about a lot of things that go on. So within our jobs, if you're part of the art world in some way, if you have kids who are looking to go to college or graduating, they're looking for work, there's always this perception of scarcity. There's always this perception that's based on you have to be selected. So you put your resume out there and you're looking to get selected for an opportunity. There's lots of competition. So we're always thinking of things from resources are scarce. That's just the way we come at it. But if we could come at it from a different way. And so that's kind of what I started to realize by wearing this kind of these objects, I started to realize that there was just this perception of these resources being scarce, but they didn't necessarily have to be scarce. And I think that was really monumental for me to kind of come to that kind of conclusion within the work. So again, here's hierarchy, here's ego. Ego was important to create because I realized that ego is something that many of us have, and it often prevents us from really like making change within ourselves, from looking really into oneself. So ego can be very helpful in some ways, but ego can also be can deter us from really seeing what's important. And so I wanted to create an ego kind of piece. An ego sits in the front, and then you have the rope, and there's two pieces behind ego, and they sit in the back. So that was very important to me. And scarcity to abundance was really about, like, there's all of these different pieces that are attached, different faces. There's these ropes, there's all of these different figures. And it was like, when I started thinking of scarcity, I didn't want to stay there. I wanted to move toward abundance. So what could abundance look like for me? And so that was why I made that piece. So those are three kind of pieces kind of in the spectrum of that work.
I'm going to ask a question, I guess. Maybe it's sort of a question. In these pieces, and you're thinking of hierarchy, and obviously, we as human beings are all competing in every way, walk of life. And are you thinking of that as well in totality when you're applying it to other parts of your life? Because I'm thinking of the fact that everybody always is in a competition. every creative endeavor, even other endeavors that are not necessarily creative, there's a competition that's always going on. And I guess I'm thinking a lot of it these days because of what is happening to so many, and just the state of humanity right now in my mind. And I wonder if any of those things are coming into play when you are when you started thinking about this hierarchy. I mean, I understand you were talking about it from an artist standpoint and getting into a gallery and those kind of things, but really, isn't it like a whole life thing?
I think, and that's one of the things that I realized. I really started to see that I'm going to move to the rebellion, because what I started to see that I started to think of scarcity as I started wearing these pieces and thinking of them. I started thinking of scarcity as us being waiting to be selected and being in competition. And you're right. And that's when I realized that, of course, it's not just with the art world. This waiting to be selected and being in competition is with everything. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, and my kids, I live in Manhattan, and the whole school system, whether even if it's private or public, you're constantly trying to get selected by a specific school. You're in competition with others to get in. And so, yeah, I started to really feel that. And then I started to think, well, and then I started to really feel like we've been indoctrinated, or at least I, as a mother, started to feel like I was indoctrinated as a child. I was led to believe that I had to be competitive in everything, that I had to wait to get selected. And then when I had my children, that had to happen with them as well. And so I really started to think more critically. These pieces, these headpieces really gave me a sense of perspective. I started to think more critically, not just about like getting into the art world, but, my daughters who were at university, or my other daughter who was, looking for a job. I started to think more critically about these things, and why was it that the whole system seemed to be built on that. And that was something that I really wanted to kind of push back against and say, why do we wait to be selected? Why do we feel that the resources are scarce? So then what I did was, within the art context, at least, I started thinking about a lot of the people at AIR Gallery. A lot of them want to get into commercial galleries, or they wanted to get into museums. So I thought, okay, with this, since I'm speaking in an art language with these pieces, as it relates to getting into museums, that's an area that we're waiting to be selected. So I decided to kind of create my own museum. I have a space upstate, and I made my own little museum. And I said, okay, I made my little studio that's 2,000 square feet, and I have my artwork, and outdoors I made little pieces. I have water space, and I invited people to come up, and I named my project Be the Museum, and I named my museum the Museum for Contemporary Artists. And what I did was I said, but you can't, when people started to email me and they were like, how do I get my work in? I said, wait a minute, that's hierarchy. I am not going to start a museum just to continue doing the things that I don't like, which is you have to be selected. There has to be a hierarchy. If you want to get in, start your own museum, make your own museum and get into that. And your museum doesn't have to be a structure. It could be your body. It could be an outdoor space, a public art space. It doesn't have to be the kind of museum that we all think of it as a museum. Certainly my museum wasn't. I have a lot of work in process. I invite people to come in to go harvesting clay with me, to pick milkweed, just to sit and have lunch. It's very kind of informal in a very different kind of space. So I started pushing back against it. I started to say, my museum isn't going to have hierarchy. There's not going to be any selection. You don't get selected to be in my museum. Come visit me. If we find a collaborative project that we want to do together, then let's do that project together. There's no competition. There's no open calls. So I started that within my museum context. And then within my kids, because I was really having this kind of conversation with myself about scarcity being that we have to wait to be selected and that we have to be in a competitive modality, I started talking with my youngest one, who was at FIT, which, is Fashion Institute of Technology. A lot of the students there are trying to be models, they're trying to be, you know, create collections, they're trying to get internships. And so I said to my daughter, why are you waiting for an internship? Go out and do your own thing, make your own work, put it up there, and you're going to learn a lot more from it. And what I realized was she started talking to her friends about this. She started saying, stop waiting to be selected for a modeling gig. Stop waiting to be selected to be an intern. Why do you want to be an intern at that company? They're using your free labor. Let's form something together and let's make our own design of clothes and let's, you know, put it on our website and let's just get started doing things and not wait to be selected. And I started hearing her talking to her friends on the phone like this. And I thought, wow, this is really powerful. And I started hearing my husband, because he was having a meeting with somebody and the woman was saying how she was really frustrated. She was trying to get somebody to do this thing. And he said, well, why are you waiting for him to do it? You can't change him. You can only change yourself. And so I started seeing how this application of like me making these headdresses and thinking about scarcity, being us waiting to be selected in all these modalities from the art world to our job market, how it was kind of transferring on my husband and on my kids. And it became such a powerful thing for me. I couldn't believe that this was starting to happen for me. So this has been this is why I wanted to bring this here and talk about this tonight, this particular project, because I felt like it spanned so many processes and thoughts.
Yeah, yeah. It's making me think about really all my life, and each one of us, I'm sure, are having some thoughts about that. But I have noted that anybody that is successful has always struck out on their own. They just make the decision, they really want to do something, and they go do it. And that's in any part of their life. And that they're not the ones that are sitting around waiting to be, as you quote unquote, selected. They just make a decision, they want to do something, and they go do it. And then if whatever happens is whatever happens. So it sounds to me like you've had this great empowering revelation through your path, and obviously you're seeing the influence around your family, which is also fascinating. It's a psychology and almost in a weird sort of way a sociology type of experiment.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I was only going to say
no, I'm just thinking about, like I said, the people that I have noticed that go after it are the ones that come out being successful because they're just driven to go after what they want, and they're not thinking about what other people want. They're just doing what they need to do and go for it. And
I want to re-emphasize what you're both saying. I was going to say early on, Yvonne, isn't it that we have to absorb the competition? It's not like abstract competition exists out there. The individual has to take that on. And, you know, as opposed to us saying, oh, the system is this, the system is that, we're all sort of subscribing to that system. And you've answered it. You're circumventing it by saying, set up another system. And whether it's a system where it doesn't have that competition, or you've now set up the parameters and the rules. So I think you answered the question that was on my mind, and you answered it quite brilliantly. And Babs, to your point, we had Brainerd Carey speak once when I was doing talks with ATOA, and he brought up the same point, that individuals who strike out, break the rules, go right into the Whitney and say, I want to be in the biennial. That kind of absurd approach works. You know, Larry, who's here, you know, he went ahead and he started his own career in the arts by doing drawing and painting on boats. You've got to sort of, you've got to break out of the system. And I think that's what you're speaking to, Yvonne. You're speaking to this attitude of you make the rules or you make the ruleless structure.
Yeah, I guess in a way I was going to say, so I'm a mathematician by training. I started my own business. I sold it. And I wasn't really, it was a different kind of way of thinking, though. I wasn't really examining hierarchy. I wasn't really examining competition. in order to start my own business, I was kind of just seeing where the opportunities were. So I wasn't thinking so much about, you know, there was a competitive model, and I went and I competed in that competitive model. I wasn't thinking about these different kinds of mindsets. I think it's not, so that's what I was going to say. It was kind of interesting when I started my business. I just said, okay, here's an opportunity to write these kind of algorithms. And so I wrote them. And then I operated within the same framework of the system and sold them to financial institutions and pharmaceutical companies. But this was a little bit different for me. It was kind of me realizing that there's this indoctrination, and it happened from a young person. And it was done to me in school, and I did it to my kids when, you know, when they were growing up. There was this idea that you have to be the best. There's this idea that you have to compete. There was this idea that you have to get selected. And so just be the best, get selected, blah, 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 blah. But what I started to realize, I think, wearing my thinking about this in a more artistic way, was that, so this, like, it's an indoctrination. We get indoctrinated into this way of thinking. And so it's not like when I started my own company, I didn't end hierarchy. I just placed myself at the top of it. So I didn't, you know, get rid of it. I just said, okay, I don't want anybody else to boss me around. I'm going to start my own business, and I'm going to boss everybody else around. Right? I wasn't really thinking about like hierarchy in the sense of what could systems look like if we didn't have hierarchy, or was there this perception of resources being scarce? And was I giving that perception to my kids and making them have to be more competitive and be the best and get into certain schools? Like, I wasn't really thinking about that. I was just thinking like, okay, they're going to be the best. They're going to get into those schools, you know, blah, blah, blah. So this was a little bit different for me. It was more saying, when somebody says, so like the Whitney example, it was kind of like, okay, you want to get into the Whitney, so you're going to go to them. And I'm saying like, well, what's the Whitney? Make your own museum, you know, have your own. So, and that's something that I did. I made my own museum. And then in terms of getting collectors to come in, people started coming and visiting my museum and wanting to purchase my work. And I said, well, no, I don't want to sell my work. I want to have a stewardship model. I want you to be able, my work to be on loan to you. So I started to be able to make up my own kind of things that were not so much in the getting selected, being competitive ownership modality. So it was a kind of, it was just more, I guess, shifting than when I had started my own business and ran it, if you see what I mean. So that was something that started that. Oh, sorry.
I just saw on Instagram someone posting that they've decided to fight back the system. You know, they're being invited to be in shows, and their way of fighting back was that they didn't feel like there's diversity in the shows, so they were stepping back. And how nice if they could experience this artwork to kind of shift the idea of making their own space, or even trying to shift the rules that they're trying to break up. I think just by stepping out isn't necessarily stepping up, because it might not have as much impact. You're suffering yourself.
Yes. It's like with AI. So I'm a member of AIR Gallery. We were started 50 years ago, and the woman who originally started it, they started it because they couldn't get into museums.
Yeah.
So they started the gallery space. They all contribute some money, and they were able to have shows in the gallery. And now here we are 50 years later, and one of the founding members is saying, wait a minute. Once we were able to start getting into the galleries, we didn't say, was this a model that we even wanted to be in? We were just, okay, we're in the system now, but we didn't kind of take that critical look. And what we realized was not only were we in the system, but we now had set up models that were just like that hierarchy that we were trying to flatten when we first started. So we have a fellowship program, and people have to apply to the fellowship program, and they can get selected, and then they can be in a show. And it was like, so was that really what we ended up doing? Was we ended up just switching it and putting ourselves in these places of hierarchy and power. We weren't really changing anything, because the models were still, you know, very much in action. People had to wait, get selected, be in something, compete. So this has been something like we at the gallery, some of us there have been really giving some more thought to.
That's, yeah, I know where a lot of us are, I think, fairly familiar with AIR Gallery, just being in the art world for this many years. And it is interesting because you're right. They're exactly like everyone else at this point. It's not any different. Because there's a selection to belong, there's a selection to compete for the fellowship things, and there's a selection
Yes.
for when they have shows, they curate
Yes.
shows, it's all about getting selected.
So
And
it ended up
submitting.
being the
Mhm.
same thing. What did we really change? We ended up nothing. We just ended up inserting ourselves in a position of power. And was it really more about what Barry was saying, or in the sense of like, you know, you go out on your own? We wouldn't necessarily, I wouldn't be asking the critical question. Now that we sit there as AIR Gallery, I'm saying, well, what do we really do? We just put ourselves in the same position that everyone else is. So myself and Daria, who's a founding member at AIR, we started to say, we should have open calls that are not based on selection. And so we have something we created. It's called Research and Development Program within AIR. And we created a whole framework around open calls that had nothing to do with being selected. We created a whole framework where there was no competition. And we did this framework 6 times with many artists who, external to AIR. People, we put out a call, we said, hey, we're interested in talking about ritual. We're going to have a show at the Eli. If you're interested, the first 6 people who say yes, who can meet every week for like 2 hours and have a conversation about their art and then install their work, you're in. I don't need to see your resume, nothing, you're in. Just, you have to be able to meet these very simple parameters. And if you can, the first 6 people, once you send it to us and say you're in, no selection. And people were flawed. They were like, what do you mean I don't have to show you my resume? I said, how do I really know how transformative your artwork is? Who am I to really judge what you're trying to do? So that's a system that Daria and I did with research and development. And now we're working within our AIR gallery space to try and get them to think more critically about the fellowship program and the biennial and all these other programs where we're using that selection model. Because everyone, and when we say to the people at AIR Gallery, our additional member, because we were started by artists. So when we say to the artists who started us and who are part of our board of directors, why are we doing this model? The answer is because everyone's doing it. And so we had a meeting and I had said something, well, everyone had slaves at one point. It wasn't right. I think it's once something becomes ingratiated and it's like something that everyone is doing, we stop necessarily looking at it in a critical way. And so that was something that I've started to get to, but it all started with literally making these helmets and thinking about scarcity and abundance and about indoctrination. And it was just a powerful kind of project for me. And yeah, I feel like AIR is just like everyone else. And we created research and development, but we're kind of, Daria and I are really sidelined by the gallery because we're so thinking about fellowship and these other kind of open call systems that are based on competition. But we are creating this, we did create research and development. We have these amazing frameworks and we're working with people, all over the world using them and trying to come away from us always having to be competing for resources and to get selected, because the power in the artist isn't from somebody else telling us that we're amazing. It should be from us and what we're doing.
I've wanted to do a curatorial project that sort of addresses this issue. And it would be one where anybody could bring artwork and you hang it on the wall and the wall sort of rotates. And once the work gets bumped down, then that artist takes theirs out. And in a way, it would empower every artist to know they were in the show, they bring their artwork, they'd feel great being there, having it up, and it would be a rotating show, no theme at all, and just anyone bring their artwork. When I had a gallery, I did not do any open calls because what I knew very quickly was those are rejection calls and people get rejected. And that was never the goal of my gallery. I would look at people's art, yes. And I would say, if I found it interesting, I'd put it in a group show or I'd phrase it differently, but I would not put a call out because I find that's sort of the wrong attitude. And that is what goes on. Look at all the people now are applying for grants. People are applying for rejection, unfortunately. And that is not the greatest system. So you're hitting on something that's very important. And it is a pandemic in the art world. There's no question about it. And the hierarchy, well, that's a whole nother thing. There's this, and there are membranes that separate different levels of the artwork, that are art world, that are both very hard to break through and are very insular, and at the same time you can subvert them. And I think you're onto that by addressing all these issues, and they are
And
just a
thinking
piece.
of them internally.
Can you, Yvonne, can you talk to us in a little bit about the different, you're saying other organizations are doing this. Can you talk about what your system is of getting the word out there in terms of these other organizations? And also, can you speak to what has been the reaction from the other board members or the other people involved with AIR and to this model that you're trying to essentially set up?
Well,
Or
we're
you
not having
have said it.
success. We're not at AIR, basically. We have certain systems and they don't seem to be going anywhere. So Daria and I have what we really have been focusing more on is that AIR is kind of artist led. So we created a program, we call it research and development. We have it on AIR's website, and we go and we just implement it. And we don't necessarily work with organizations, we work with other artists. So when we did the open call framework, we actually just put out a call and we said, we create this framework and we're trying to test it. And we just tested it 6 or 7 times in various modalities. And each time we would say, okay, we're looking for 6 or 7 or 8 artists. And once we got that number, then we would basically work within the context of whatever that open call was and ultimately create work if that was what it was about, or show or have conversations about various things. And it's been amazing. I mean, it's been transformative for me. So I haven't necessarily, we haven't set it up in a way like we're telling people what they need to do. Well, instead what we said is we're doing this for ourselves and we're putting these frameworks out there. And if other people want to use them, then they're more than welcome to. And so sometimes another artist will hear about it and they'll say, hey, we'd love for you to come in and have a conversation. So we went to JCal and had a conversation there, started to kind of, because it's very hard, I think. As artists, we are all so in need of being selected, of somebody telling us your work is worthy of, not many of us are, of being in an open call, getting our artwork out there. And so I think what we run into a lot is people like, but I need space, I need to show my work. And we're like, why not show your work in your living room? Why not have 5 people come together and you show it there, or show it outside in the garage? Like, there's so much space. So what are you really after? So I think the last year has been amazing in the sense we've met so many different artists, some of whom are so like-minded and transformative and doing various things, like Blanca, who opened up her living room as a project space 4 months out of the year, and invites artists to come in and show work and have conversations and have dinners. And there's another artist in Queens who has the Garage Art Center. She turned her garage into an art space and has shows there every month. And she's transformative. And so we started to meet other like-minded people, and then other artists who are starting to recognize this. They know the system isn't working for them, and what are different ways that they can go about it. So they've started coming on, asking questions, seeing the way that we're working and doing things. But we've tried to really say, my goal isn't to change you. My goal is to look at myself, to see where I'm operating in scarcity, and then to try and change that and to share that out. And if you're interested, then you can do the same. But I can't waste time trying to change somebody because it's exhausting. Instead, I can just create for myself and invite like-minded people in, and then it just starts to grow. And so that's kind of what we've been doing.
And Yvonne, you've mentioned Blanca. I always get her last name. I think it's Amazuka.
Yes.
3A Gallery in the South Bronx on like Alexander. She is a great person to know. She is really full of great energy. And yes, she's got a small apartment and she runs some serious shows there.
And she wouldn't call them shows, she'd call them projects, because that's what she's really trying to get people to see it as, a project space, not an exhibition space, but a project space.
And yes, at one recently, I think the artist cooked a meal.
Yes, the writers, well. Yes, they had writing workshops there, they cooked a meal there. And so that it's been really exciting. I've known Blanca, I don't know, maybe 7 or 8 years. And so, and having conversations, you know, around these things. And I think that AIR, personally, as a member of AIR, I think that it can be, we spend a lot of time mimicking other systems. And I feel like if we started being more innovative and pushing forward some of the ideas that Daria and I have, she a founding member, I mean, she's been there for 50 years. And she's saying, look, I had 21 woman shows. We really have to change things. And so I think it would be amazing if AIR would embrace change. But what I think I've realized is that it's difficult, because the things, even starting a business, when you start a business, you're very much able to innovate and adapt at first. But then the older you get, the more stuck junk you got in the trunk. And it becomes harder sometimes to innovate and to shift. So I think that that's what AIR has run into. We've become just like so many others out there. And I just feel like when we are so amazing because we are run by artists. But I think the problem is also we're run by artists. And in some ways we have been hurt by these systems, and we're used to the system of being selected in competition. That's all we know. Everyone's doing it. So it's very difficult for some people to say, well, why are we doing that? We don't have to be doing that. Let's innovate. So, I mean, I think that that's a hard thing that we've run into with AIR, but Daria being there for 50 years is not willing to go quietly into the night. And so we, you know, again, we fight with our research and development program. We share it out. We talk to other people about it. And that's what we've been doing in that realm.
Where I live, we have what's called an Art PM Challenge. And it's been going on for 14 years. This one gallery just says, everyone make art in February. And, you know, on March 1st, bring it in. And he just hangs it all up. And it's just grown over the years. And it's everyone, you know, there's very successful artists to kids and everyone in between. So it's in that same philosophy that you're saying, that it's just like a pop up, and you know, and then even if people don't do it, they talk about working on things. It's inspiring just to be invited.
Yeah, just to, and I think that that's where art truly rests. Like, I create art for myself, and I'm tackling issues, and all the art that I create comes out of those issues or things that I'm like thinking about. And I think, and what we see is that it's, again, that it's not just in the art world, that we see it in the job market, we see it in the education market. And so we've been indoctrinated in so many different industries. It's almost like we've been indoctrinated into believing that scarcity is the way that we have to act. And once we recognize that we are acting in a scarcity modality, believing that the resources are scarce, and using hierarchy, selectivity, competition modalities, once we can start to see them in every phase of our life, then we can maybe make subtle shifts around them to change that up a little bit, and not necessarily to place yourself in that position of power, because that's just reenacting an old system, but really trying to disrupt it. So that's something that, so that's the difference. It's not like saying, I know people who start galleries and then they end up doing open calls or whatever things, and all they did was put themselves in that position of power. And what I'm saying is, maybe we can recognize that that hasn't really changed the system. It just changes, it just now gives you a seat at a table. But really I know Shirley was all about the seat at the bring your own folding chair, but I'm starting to really think bringing your folding chair to adapt to a table that really isn't meant for you is a bad thing, because you're not really reevaluating the table. You're not saying, well, maybe there shouldn't be a table at all. You know, maybe there should be something else. You're trying to fit into something that maybe isn't right at all. So I'm more about saying, instead of bringing our folding chair to that table, for us to maybe really look critically at the table, and then maybe try and make, you know, bigger changes, recognizing that the systems that are at play are bigger than just the table. So that's all come, I think, in the last, you know, since I started this project and really been thinking about scarcity and little shifts that we can make. So one of my friends, you know, I was talking about this to probably 10 or 15 women, we all have kids. We were chatting about how we see the scarcity system, this thing in schools. So we made this little thing around it. It was a little video, and We had conversations with our kids about it, and it was very transformative in many ways. And this, we called it the rebellion, which is on the screen. And the idea was that, you know, I said, I'm 50, but I can't help thinking I've been somehow indoctrinated into a cult that has left future generations in anguish with debt and anxiety. Through sculpture, video, photography, and fabric, I'm exploring this notion. I'm not saying our youth shouldn't be educated, but I'm exploring how it's happening and the economic, physical, and social choices that have left future generations in psychological and economic fragility, and has me feeling more and more like I was indoctrinated into a cult for colleges or a cult for education. And that's how powerful me with these headdresses, like me thinking about this. And so I started having conversations with my kids and these women and their kids and other people. And we started realizing, like, my God, this whole thing about scarcity and having to get selected, you know, it's been going on since we were kids, and we taught it to our kids, and they have all this anxiety. And could we reimagine what that system could look like? So I made a terracotta, a helmet out of clay. Again, I harvested it from the clay in the rivers, and I fired it. And the idea was that we reimagined like the damage that we had done in some ways to our kids, and what was done to us as well, by saying, like, the kids ended up basically rebelling. So I made this whole kind of Afrofuturistic kind of thing, or just where what ended up happening was that the kids ended up saying that the parents were wrong, and that what we wanted for them was not what they wanted for themselves, that school was no longer fulfilling who they were. And it was just making them more anxious and giving them more anxiety, and that the way that school was, so much has gone on that they really needed a change, and they ended up rebelling against the parents and the school system. And we did this whole project, and I did some photographs of it with me in the helmets. But ultimately, it was based on what the students were saying in high schools and colleges. And they ultimately came up with, companies had to stop mandating everyone have a college degree to work for them was a better, I'll read this to you because I thought it was really kind of interesting. So we did this thing, it was called the Uprising. And it said the uprising started in New York City in the year 2036, where youth started at age 5 in test prep schools, Saturdays and Sundays, to gain entry into private and elite schools, only to graduate from college with no job and massive debt. The youth had enough. The rebellion quickly spread to rural youth. Here stands the remnants of the last known university. So that's me, and I'm kind of like, you know, at the wall of the last known university. And this came from like the students and everyone I was working with. They said the realization in 2032, so many students were in debt to universities that they started questioning the notion that one makes more with a college degree. They concluded many of the companies requiring college degrees were profiting from them through loans, mergers. Unlike the adults, the youth stated every child shouldn't have to go to college because colleges were the new slave master requiring servitude forever. They felt their parents were brainwashed from decades of indoctrination. The conclusion, companies had to stop mandating everyone have a college degree to work for them was a better approach. Companies had to stop profiting from the debt the students racked up was the best approach. Youth who went to college did make more money, but that was because those who paid more required it. And when one looked closely, the reason wasn't because the college prepared them for work better. So what ended up happening was we started looking critically at companies like JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs. Many of these companies didn't require college degrees. If you look, some of the managing directors there, and some of them I've worked at, didn't even have a college degree. But there's a lot of things that are going on underneath the covers within some of these organizations. And all of a sudden we started requiring college degrees, and now we're requiring masters, and some things are requiring PhDs. And the question is, when will it be enough? First, they didn't require a college degree. Now they require college degrees. Soon they're going to, and some of them require masters. And so it was a real fun kind of project. It was, we're still working on it. We're making a whole video about it. And it's just been really interesting to hear them. And they're angry. And I felt like, Jesus, like I'm really starting to understand, and they should be. I mean, I went to university. I didn't pay any money. I went to NYU. I studied mathematics at Courant. but my mom didn't have that much. So that's why I didn't pay. But now for my daughter to go there would have cost $72,000. And the question became, even if you can afford it and you do it, I just felt like that's not even like, that's the way you keep this thing going and going and going, because, oh, I can afford it, I'm going to send my kid here, or I'm going to take a second loan on my house, or whatever the case is. And so it's been a really fun project, and working with the kids and starting to really, so when I had my own company, I would have hired people who came from Columbia or NYU. Because I was kind of ingratiated in the system. It's only since I've kind of come away from it that I could really look and say, wait a minute, what is really going on here? Does everyone, and I started to realize that later on when I started meeting kids who were phenomenal in math, who never went to university, who were just really good and hardworking. And I was like, this is really interesting. And that was a turning point for me, but I didn't dig into it too much. But then over the last year and a half, I've really been digging more into that. So these are some of the things that I've been thinking more about. And even within my own kids, like my own daughter at university now, and saying, I used to be like, you have to have a 3.9. And now I'm like, yeah, just graduate, go and try the things that are going to make you excited. I look at my firstborn daughter who did everything right, had the 3.9, and she's more anxious because I think that I made her that way. My husband and I made her more anxious. We were only doing to her what was done to us. And from a financial perspective, it seemed like, well, then she'll be able to have her house. She'll be able to have this and that. But you're looking at this younger generation and they're anxious and they're scared. And they're looking at some of them, the debt that they have and some of the lies, because they graduated from universities with degrees in mathematics and still can't get jobs. So because many of the jobs are going overseas, or because I've written algorithms that I don't need you anymore. So it's been a very interesting time in using art in this way to kind of delve into these other topics.
Well, thank you for all the hard work that you're doing. It's so powerful. I think that even just someone that's unfamiliar with the ideas could read about it and be inspired. So congratulations, and thank you for sharing.
Oh, yeah. I'm
Been
really
fascinating.
happy for me. Like I'm really learning, and it's transformed me and the way I think of my kids and the way I talk to them about things, and my husband as well.
It's been fascinating, interesting perspective. Thank you for that, Yvonne.
You're so welcome. You're so welcome.
Yeah.
And it's
I
almost
mean,
7, so I think it's almost time to go. I'm going to leave you with something fun. So this last thing I'll show you is this project about abundance, and it's abundance in water, and it's about believing that one person can make a difference. So I have a creek upstate, and there's a lot of pollutants in it. So I went and I basically did a test. I saw the different pollutants in it, and I make these sculptures out of clay, and then I make a mold, and then I put water in the mold, and I filter it based on cleaning up all of the pollutants that's in the water. And then I put the piece back in the water. So one by one, each of the sculptures is kind of cleansing the water. And so I've been really having a lot of fun with this. And so this is an ice sculpture, but it's based on the fact that I've cleaned all the water, and now it's going back into the system and it's cleaning that system. So here's me kind of going to get the water. Here's me, I made a mold and I'm pouring the water in after I've cleaned it. And here's the piece now, like just sitting in the water. And I've done a bunch of them, and these are all ice sculptures, and they have all been, the water has been cleaned, and they go back into the creek and they clean it one sculpture at a time. So the idea in abundance that we are like just rethinking the way that we're tackling things, and believing that one person with one thing that they're doing can make all the difference.
Yvonne, you and I met, and I think what I loved is all the philosophical questions that you posed, and the idea that we are our own little museum. We in life, we don't actually need to reinvent the wheel, because we have as artists our own gallery, our own collections, our own ideas within us. And you took the performative and the idea of gallery and the 4 walls and everything, and you just exploded it by doing your own thing out in space. So, and what I found so novel was how you got Google to actually pinpoint your museum. So, there you are doing your own thing. And it's a really a novel way of looking at how empowering an artist can be. It's not within the gallery, it's within you. So
Yeah, and just whatever it is, the gallery, whatever you're dealing with, whether it's art or it's working, your job or it's education, that it is all within us. And if we can recognize these when we're in scarcity mode and make little shifts, little changes, and really think of what abundance might mean to us. And so for me, like the Be the Museum project was a way for me to say, to reevaluate the art world in a context of I can be my own museum. And, that was really cool. And I've made my own little museum cards. And now everybody, just today I went to the MoMA and my friend was like getting ready to pay. And I said, you don't have to pay. I have my museum card. And I literally showed it at the MoMA and we both went in for free. Last week, I showed it at the New Museum and we both went in, and my daughter and I went in for free. And it was like tiny little shifts, believing in abundance and not scarcity for ourselves, and recognizing when we are moving in that way, just internally for ourselves, can not only shift us and help us grow, but can have an infinite effect on those that we're around as well.
exactly.
When did you leave mathematics? When did you leave?
Probably around 10 years ago. So I wrote financial algorithms and I kind of left it for good 10 years ago. I just really wanted to, I just really felt this kind of this pull that I feel like math is creative. It's very creative, but I felt this pull in a different way to explore things, not just like math was a tool to explore. And I felt like I needed to have more tools that I used to explore. Photography, sculpture, welding, like there was all these tools that I could have to explore. And so that I think was around 10 years ago.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize how much in common mathematics and art have. I always loved mathematics and went pretty high up in high school to pre-calculus, and surprising, English was not my forte, but it was sort of interesting because mathematics can serve you really well. So it's just fascinating. Did you also delve into art before you were doing, while you were doing your mathematics?
So, I mean, I guess I've always felt that I was artistic, and I feel like math and I don't see them separately. I guess I see like math can be art, math is creative and it can be artistic. So I kind of, and I still use math in some of the things that I do now. Like right now I'm working on an AI project and that uses algorithms. And so that's an artistic project and it uses math as like the tool. So I kind of see like sculpture, math, welding, these are all tools that I can pull from as I'm asking questions and evaluating them. I just see them painting. I did a huge murals outdoors. I'm asking questions about revitalization and communities. And so these all just become like tools.
Well, the point is you never really leave mathematics. It's sort of a way of thinking. It's a logic. And certainly some of the questions you pose, you're taking a superstructure view, a high up view, which does sort of happen in math. First, I just want to thank Yvonne. That was beautiful.
Thank you.
That was
Thank you for all of your questions.
That was a lot to take in. And, I guess, I don't want to put down the arts, but you are making so many large points. And I know everything you're saying is pertinent to the art world, but I think it's pertinent to the larger world, especially education. I think of Black Mountain College, and then that tried to set up another program for arts. And of course, it ended up influencing all the liberal arts that was to come. It was a very big movement and change that became incorporated. I think you're hitting on points. What you said about paying for college, there are some billionaires offering people money not to go to college. There are some approaches that realize this is crazy. This sort of debtor education that we're in right now actually doesn't pay off. And as well, it is a prejudiced system because you have to have that money to play that game. or take on the debt, which is crazy. Or like you say, you could be a 3.9 or a 4.0 student and you're not getting in. So there's a lot of lose-lose. I just
And you're
spent,
exhausted by it. And the other thing is that when you're spending all your time and resources and your money on going to college, there are other opportunities over here that you're not being able to investigate. So I'm not saying that people don't go to college, but I am saying that there are so many that if we're so hyper focused on this thing over here, then we may be missing other things, around. And any system that tries to focus us over here, I'm often looking at, well, that might be the distraction. And I guess that might be just the way that I think in terms of like my business mind. When everybody tries to put me here, I'm like, the opportunity is here because everybody's going here. There's no opportunity, however one defines it. It's over here. And it's just like with fellowships and grants, this is the distraction. All the opportunities are here. And that's kind of, I think, the way my mind sees things.
This whole thing with the going into debt, my sister, who is a lawyer, but she's a lawyer for the county, and it's 20 years out and she's still paying a school loan, and the way that it's rigged, this is the whole problem with, she had to refinance, and what she refinanced it, consolidated it, or however it worked out, because she couldn't afford the earlier payment in the beginning, or after, I think it was after 10 years of paying it, and she had to redo it. And then every time she would go for some program that was supposed to help her to get rid of the debt, somehow that program didn't apply to that particular loan. She just really literally did it again. And because there was supposed to be well, she's going for the whole thing because she was working for the county. So she wasn't making big lawyer money. And that was her job for 20 plus years. It's staggering what the system has done to her. And she's still to this day paying a loan that she's probably paid, like a $65,000 loan that she's probably paid $200,000 for over the years. I remember going to, because I was involved with some political stuff in 2018, and Tom Steyer had come here. I was 26 years in New York, but we're here in St. Pete, Florida now. And he came and there were people there. And the one thing that everybody was talking about were these school loans. And he was talking about different ways that they're trying to change this. And this is one of the reasons that I was such a big proponent of Elizabeth Warren, because she's been trying to really get rid of this. And of course, Bernie Sanders, blah, blah, blah. This thing, it's such a racket. And what happens is these companies have made so much money that my sister can never she can't talk to a person. You can't get to talk to a person. And it's all the stuff where you're doing online. I mean, it's a serious racket in this country.
And I don't know how we get more people to understand it. I mean, and I have a friend who did end up going and working in a big law firm. You know what, though? She owes $389,000. She went to University of Pennsylvania and Harvard, and she owes $389,000. She worked for this big firm for 5 years, and her last job was going into communities and trying to convince people to get a $10,000 payout on something, on Latin American communities, to get a $10,000 payout on something where they literally should have gotten millions. And she remembered the moment she was in the bathroom talking to her mother crying, and her mom went and picked her up, and she was like 30 years old, and said, let's just go home. And she had a real breakdown. And it was she had all those loans, 400, a lot of loans.
And my sister was going when there wasn't as much money. This is the whole point. But she's now paid this ridiculous sum of money.
You've paid you already paid it. Why is she still paying all this?
Over and over and over and then some. But it's the profit of these companies that you're talking about. It really is to the profit. All right, I'll stop.
They say when you take a 30-year mortgage, you end up paying the principal 2.5 times. Imagine going into a restaurant and having a $20 bill and saying, I'm going to give you $2. And then next year, $2. That'd be absurd. Of course, some of us do that with credit cards, but with homes, we're all welcome to do that. That was the big crash of 2008, I believe it was, where people were putting zero down and having very low interest for a few years. And so we somehow get people entangled into debt over their head. And these could be people who are quite well off with large incomes. So I've always thought it doesn't make so much sense for us to be taking on debt and not being able to afford what we buy, because it puts this spiral of debt on us, and of course carrying the debt, and then all the stress it brings, which I think you're bringing out, Yvonne, that a lot of these structures bring stress, and stress brings bad health, and simply put, you're not enjoying your life. It really
And the
is.
systems are there, and you're basically like, in the case of like, all these things that we're seeing are things that are not just happening in art, they're happening in education, they're happening job opportunities. And I just seeing all of this now, seeing the frameworks and how if we can really understand, like, if we can at least start to understand it, maybe and talk about it, that maybe this can make some subtle changes. When I did that piece that I read to you, I mean, it involved many students, and some of them, they turned down universities that were charging a lot of money. They just said, we're not going to do it. And they said, I'm going to go to City College for $7,000 where my parents can afford it. And it was just like a big thing. Like, they felt so relieved to be able to have the conversation. And the parents were like, well, I only wanted you to go there because I wanted you to have the best. And they were like, I don't want to go there and have you have to take a second mortgage on your home. Like, if we could have had that real conversation, I would never have wanted you to do that, Mom. So I felt like just by like giving people space to have conversations, and I learned a lot as well, because it was really about me saying, wow, I really feel like I messed that up with my kids. Like, I was indoctrinated and I believed a certain way, and then I taught my kids that, and I want to stop that cycle. So I need to have that conversation with my kids, and then how it reflected outward, and more people ended up having the conversation, and we created this piece. And that's been very exciting as well. But I definitely feel like it starts within us. Yeah.
Well, it's obvious to me, Yvonne, you have a long road to go in the art world, and you have a lot of other paths that you're going to travel, and you're going to make change happen by opening up the right dialogue of questions, which we're often like blinded into certain points of view. And I think as artists, our goal is to knock those blinders off and to see a much wider horizon. And I think you've opened up all of our minds in many ways that solve many of our issues. Artists, yes, most of our big issue is getting our work out and getting it seen. And you're proposing alternative solutions. I put in the chat Blanca's 3A space in the Bronx. I also put Good Naked Gallery. Jacqueline Cedar runs that. She runs that out of her living room. And she does what you do, Yvonne. She not only runs it in her living room, but then she has an exhibit in a park where they hang work on trees, and it's just in a space. And I got news for you. Jacqueline Cedars is no little force in the art world. And Blanca is a force that's growing and has been around. And at ATOA, there was once a talk on all alternative spaces. That is a new movement for the last, I don't know if it's 5 years or 7 years.
And why are they alternative spaces? Like, why is my museum an alternative space? So I think that we should really think about that. How is the place that gets so many people considered the alternative? And you go into galleries are often empty. You come to my museum, I'm like telling people, oh, no, I'm only really wanting one person at a time, and like 20 show up. I'm like, wait, you were supposed to kind of fill out the invite form because I want it to be a different kind of experience. So I feel like we can also, what do we mean by alternative space? Like,
you're right. The language, I'm sort of inheriting a language, and the language has its biases. No,
it certainly does.
It does.
And I mean, I'm looking at this within myself too. So I mean, this kind of mindset, I'm critiquing it within myself often. Daria, a lot of my friends, when we say things now, we think about them. We're really critical about like, what is the language that we're using, and how come we're thinking of things a certain way? Because often we have all been indoctrinated into systems, and we don't really even understand that. And so by really critiquing a little bit, as much as we can, because we can't do it all the time, we go bonkers, but like, think about the things that you think that's just the way it is, and then really think about that, tweak it a little, play with it. And I think that's a first start. That's what I started to do with my projects.
And to your point about education, Henry Ford was for education, but he was for education so his workers could do a better job. And education is one way in which we are controlled. I mean, think of the history you learn going to school. It was mostly lies. It was mostly propaganda, America the Great and all that. I mean, watch Untold Stories of American History by, I think it's Oliver Stone. You'll wake up to what America really is. And so education is often an opiate of the masses, and it's been used to control the masses to think a certain way. And I think you're proposing not only a new kind of education, a new kind of gallery structure or space structure where art is sort of an arts space. And a lot to take in. This talk will be on YouTube in a day or two. I'll send you a link, Yvonne. Once again, thank you. That opened us all up in a great way, really did. And thank everybody for their contributions to the questions and just being a part. I think that's a part of what I like to do here. I like to set up, these talks are a different space. It's a different, mindset for us. And I think the more artists do this, you set up the structure. You don't just apply to a structure to be accepted. That's in some way a lose-lose scenario to begin with. And so, try and apply, how do you make this relevant in your art practice, in your art world? How do you take what we've learned from Yvonne and sort of make it real? And I think her point is, it's right there. The answers are right there. They're close to home. They're very doable. And to your point, you have a museum card. It's your museum. All of a sudden, the doors are open. There was an artist once in the Bronx who set up and he took your picture and he gave fake press passes to get into museums. It was a brilliant idea for its sort of data play, but it also gives artists the access. Now, that was maybe crossing a few lines, but.
Look at that. That's my museum card. I made it myself. It says Museum for Contemporary Artists. I sent away, I printed up 50 of them. And I literally I literally use it and go to the museums. And my friend who worked at the new museum, and she met us at a different museum, I won't say the new museum, a different museum, met us at the MoMA, and she showed her card and I showed mine, and we both got in for free. And the difference is that she's working for another space and I created my own space. So I just think that that's really exciting and very interesting. And once we start playing with the system in subtle ways, our mind shifts and we start to, we no longer think, why not? We think definitely, of course, not. What, we can't do this. Yes, we can. Let's try it. And so that's it. Subtle tweaks. And then our mind starts like down this whole road of infinite possibility.
That's such a great thing that you did. I have now been for years a member of MoMA, but I do it as an artist. And at least they have that option. Not a lot of museums don't have that option. So I'm paying literally $35 for the year, which is a whole lot less than everyone else is paying, but it's still paying some money. And then you're trying to deal with every museum you want to go into. They really do. They do need to do something that affords the artists. And I'm now in the collection of the Birchfield Penny in Buffalo, and it was so lovely the way they treated me, because they sent me a lifetime membership. I can go in now anytime I want. I'm not living there, but it's a wonderful thing that they're doing. And frankly, I have museums that I have work in that haven't done that for me. Like, I'm sorry, but like, what the fuck? Why aren't you letting me into the museum that you have my work in?
It's pretty crazy. And it's like, as artists too, it's kind of like a lot of us culture makers being able to go into a museum and be inspired. I'm thinking like, wait a minute, why do we have to pay? We're the culture makers. When we get, you want us when we're dead, you want us when we're almost dead, but you don't want to support us when we're moving through our trajectory.
Yes. Yeah. And I really do. As long as you can prove that you're an artist and you're working, you're showing, you have this thing, you should be able to just get into these spaces, period, the end.
Museum for Contemporary Artists. Make your
all right, there you go.
Be the museum. I am the artist. I make the art. I am the museum. Be the museum.
There you go. I love
Great word.
That's great.
Thank you so much. Keep in mind out. Thank you, Mo, for modeling for us. This was great. Thanks, Yvonne.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Mo. Bye.